Okay, we are recording now, and we are going to start the 2020 Terasem Colloquium. We have a lot of interesting talks ahead, so I'm not going to waste much time on introductions. And in fact, the first speaker doesn't need any introduction at all. I'd like to give the floor to Howard Bloom. Howard, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank Giulia for putting this conference together. I want to thank him for giving me the opportunity to keynote the conference. And the conference is about transpartisan approaches to the intersection of space expansion, emerging technologies, and human rights. I wanted to start with the ethics of space expansion, emerging technologies, and human rights, because ethics and technology is a subject that really bothers me. It's not that I'm afraid of technology. I'm not. I'm afraid of ethicists. Our most important ethical imperative is never to choke technology. Our most important ethical imperative is never to strangle promising new technologies with the noose of so-called ethical thinking. Look, a hammer can be used to build a house, or a hammer can be used to kill. But because a hammer can be used to kill, we don't ban the use of hammers. We need to smother our impulse to freeze innovation with ethical considerations. Our most important ethical imperative is to do with technology what we do with our citizens. We give them freedom and only come after them if they are planning or perpetrating actual criminal behavior. If we use the kinds of ethical arguments that I hear these days with regard to technology, we would point out how frequently humans have been killers and would straitjacket every male when he turns 12 years old. Look, new technologies will take us to the skies. New technologies will give us human rights of kinds we never imagined before, entirely new human capabilities. So never put a straitjacket on imagination and invention. It's innovation that will save the planet, and I'll go into that in a few seconds. It's innovation that will save the human race. It's innovation that will save nature by giving nature what nature aches for the most: new homes, new niches in which to flourish. It's innovation that will give nature new homes in the sky. It's innovation that will garden the solar system and green the galaxy. Garden the solar system and green the galaxy just happens to be the name of a 100-picture video manifesto or visual manifesto that I wrote for the National Space Society a few years ago. And it's been adopted as the National Space Society's official vision. And basically what Garden the Solar System, Green the Galaxy points out is that once upon a time, there was an incredibly ghastly planet, a poison pill of stone, the home of climate catastrophe, circling a mediocre yellow star. And that ball of stone was so inimical to anything we might think of as life. It was such an impossible place in which life could exist that it changed its temperature every 3 hours. Every 3 hours, the temperature went up 88 degrees. Every 3 hours, it went down 88 degrees. For 3 hours, it was bathed in this poisonous stuff called radiation. And for another 3 hours, it was buried in this equally poisonous stuff called darkness. Plus, it had a tilt to its axis. So as it went around this middling yellow sun, it went through massive climate catastrophes, massive climate change. We call those catastrophes summer, winter, fall, and spring. That planet was the Earth. Even its atmosphere and its seas were seething vats and seething bell jars of poisonous gases and liquids. And yet somehow, and we really do not know how, a very strange experiment in a highly complex system of mega molecularity came along and worked out all kinds of tricks in the middle of these disasters and catastrophes that allowed it to make duplicate copies of itself. And despite all of the enormous and dangerous change going on around it, lethal change, it managed to survive, and it operated under a couple of different imperatives. One was kidnap, seduce, and recruit as many dead atoms and molecules as you could find and bring them into the process of life. And the other was be imperialistic, be colonialistic, take as much territory as you can possibly find, take as many of these disasters that you find yourself in the middle of, and turn them into opportunities. And that's what life has been doing ever since. There's an instructive example from about 120 million years ago. These creatures that come along that we call dinosaurs, flourishing in the midst of this planet of climate disaster. And the creatures had managed to find a way to, well, let's go back a little step. First of all, life started in the sea. Going to land was an impossible space program. And if you'd been the parent to one of the unicellular creatures that wanted to go up on land, you would have counseled your offspring, do not go there. It's absolutely impossible. The place is bleached by radiation. It's banged by darkness. It has no water for you, no place for you to exist. And yet some of these single-celled creatures managed to take to the land. Many, many years later, roughly at least 640 million years later, there were dinosaurs. And some dinosaurs had the biological equivalent of a crazy idea. They wanted to enter another dark, empty, and impossible place where there was absolutely nothing for them. They wanted to fly. Now, if you've been one of their parents, one of the nice, conservative, eco-friendly dinosaurs, you'd have said, don't you dare. Haven't you looked into the sky? There's nothing up there for you. There is nothing to eat. There is no place for you to nest. There is no protection. There's nothing up there. Look above your head one more time. Look at what's up there. Nothing. And yet those loony dinosaurs made the, again, genetic decision to fly. Now, today, many of you haven't gone out yet because it's early in the morning in some places. Some of you are in places where you have gone out. But when you go out today, how many of the conservative dinosaurs who did things in an eco-friendly way are you likely to see? And the answer is zero, none, not a single one. And how many of the loony dinosaurs who took to the skies are you likely to see? You're going to see at the very least dozens and possibly hundreds because they're called birds. What's more, there are twice as many birds as there are land-walking species like mammals, which means there are twice as many ways to make a living in the vast and hostile emptiness of the sky as there are to make a living down here on the surface of the land. And there's one more little fact that's worth considering. If you are born a sky creature, let's say anything from a bird to a bat, you will have a 60% longer lifespan than the lifespan of creatures that walk the earth. Now, is nature trying to tell us anything? Like, go up, young man or young woman, go up. That nature's natural inclination is to look at the laws of nature and to break them and to celebrate breaking them, because every time nature breaks a law, nature makes entirely new laws. And frankly, nature is willful and nature is ambitious. Nature does this kind of stuff all the time. Well, when it comes to innovation, if the parental generation, the generation of conservatives, the generation of eco-thinkers had been allowed their way, none of their children would have taken to the sky. Innovation led to whole new kinds of animal rights. Innovation leads to whole new kinds of human rights. We are about, well, as of yesterday, no, it was the day before yesterday, Tuesday, SpaceX tried something really cheeky. Instead of just working with the kinds of conventional rockets that everybody else uses that can at most lift 4 people, 4 humans to the sky at a time, SpaceX started to launch a prototype of a vehicle that's designed to take 100 humans to the skies at once. 100 humans to Mars, 100 humans to the moon. The launch, it's only a prototype, but the launch was almost perfect. The takeoff was perfect. The rise to 8 miles high was perfect. A belly flop maneuver that's necessary to allow this rocket to land on its tail, to come down without burning itself up in the atmosphere, then land on its tail, was absolutely perfect. The only problem came when the rocket tried to settle down on the ground, and the ground and the rocket had a slight disagreement about where the empty air ended and the solid stuff began, and the rocket blew up. When we do things like this, we open whole new kinds of human possibilities we never imagined before. That rocket, the SpaceX Starship, will open whole new possibilities that even Elon Musk, its maker, has never, ever dreamed of. And those are the things we come to regard as human rights. So that's one lesson in never stopping a technology before its time. Another is right now, actually it's Elon who's doing the same thing in a different area. It's called his Neuralink project. In 1970, I started writing about something I called the ultimate chip. And the ultimate chip was something that could be an implant, or it could connect with your brain without any physical implantation. And it was there so that when you wake up in the morning and you have that brilliant idea on your way to the bathroom, and it's so brilliant that you know that you will forget it, that you will remember it after you are finished fumbling for the toilet paper. And by the time you get back to a space where you've got paper and pencil, it's gone. And it's gone forever. The ultimate chip will store that idea for you. The ultimate chip, when you are on a business trip to Rome and you've just landed, you're traveling on your own to save your company money, of course, if travel ever comes back again, and you go down to the hotel lounge looking for human company, but you're intimidated. You're surrounded by people you don't know. You don't even know how to speak their language. The ultimate chip will tell you who's who in the bar using facial recognition. The new chip will point you to people with whom you share interests. The ultimate chip will give you opening conversational lines with which to start conversations. And the ultimate chip will translate back and forth between Italian and English so that you and a person who doesn't speak a word of English can communicate. These are the kinds of new capabilities that are just around the corner for us. And as I say, 100, even 50 years from now, we will regard the things that these devices allow us to do as absolute rights. But until we develop these things, these rights will simply not come into existence. And what I have friends who are ethicists, and the mere sound of their voice sometimes makes me cringe. I love them. They are delightful people. It isn't the sound of their voices by itself that's making me cringe. It's their way of poking into technological business. For example, AI. Even bright people like Elon Musk are telling us that AI is going to be one of the most profound dangers that the human race has ever experienced. I seriously doubt it. First of all, we get to put together the fundamentals on which AI operates. We get to put together the assumptions on which AI operates. Secondly, if AI is smart, there's no reason it will ever have the kind of urge toward usurpation and extermination that we humans have. And in nature, when a new species comes along, it does not exterminate previous species. When multicellular creatures came along approximately 1 billion years ago, they did not exterminate unicellular creatures, one-celled creatures, not by any stretch of the imagination. They worked out synergistic deals with those previous levels of biological development. And those deals are so synergistic that right now you cannot function without vast colonies of bacteria garrisoning your throat against invading microbes, and especially garrisoning your gut. There are hundreds and even thousands of different species of bacteria living in your gut. They do not live solitary lives. A bacterium lives in basically a megacity. A bacterial colony the size of your palm is so thin that you can't see it, but it's got 7 trillion creatures, more than all the humans who have ever existed. And yet you have colony after colony after colony of these things. What are they there for? What are they good for? You have a synergistic relationship. You go down to the store and you buy yourself a package of chocolate eclairs. What you don't know when you get them home is that you cannot eat chocolate eclairs. It's the bacteria who eat the chocolate eclairs for you. And then the bacteria excrete glucose, which is food, fuel, manna from heaven for you. But without the bacteria, you wouldn't be able to eat. You wouldn't be able to make vitamin P and vitamin K, for example, which those bacteria create for you. And without you to walk down to the store, to walk entire colonies of bacteria down to the store and to pick out chocolate eclairs, the bacteria would have nothing to eat. So is it likely that artificial intelligence is going to try to wipe us out when artificial intelligence, we hope, will be more intelligent than we will, and will be able to see these synergies, we hope, far more easily than we will? It is extremely unlikely. So again, it isn't the technologies that I fear, it's the ethicists. That's it. That's the entire presentation.
Thank you very much, Howard. This was really mind-opening as usual. Now we have a few minutes before the next talk. Does anyone have questions for Howard? If you do, please switch your microphone on and ask the question, or use the chat box. I'm going to give 30 seconds for that. If nobody's fast enough.
No questions. The questions are where the fun begins.
Hold on.
That's where the intellectual ping pong balls go back and forth.
I want to see if, I'm giving priority to other
for Howard.
Okay. David.
Hey, Howard, nice to see you.
David.
Isn't an invasive species a counterexample to your contention that species don't wipe out other species?
Isn't which species?
Invasive species.
Oh, invasive species. No, invasive species, to the best of my knowledge, leave room for other species as well. Now, David, I could be wrong because I'm not an expert on invasive species. What I've been noticing is that when we go goo and ga and ooh and ah over the wonderful flora and fauna and flora of places like Hawaii, what we're gooing over is invasive species, because the Polynesians brought invasive species approximately 1,000, 1,200 years ago to Hawaii. And invasive species have been taking advantage of everything from air currents and water currents to other species that will cart them around for as long as there's been life. I mean, how do we know that? Well, one of the privileges that Charles Darwin got out of his 5-year voyage of the Beagle was the privilege of visiting the Galapagos Islands, where things were totally and completely untouched by humans. And what did he study? He studied the lizards of the Galapagos Island. What are those things called again? Those iguanas of the Galapagos Island. Well, the iguanas of the Galapagos Island are not native to the Galapagos Island. They came as an invasive species. It is supposed these days that they came on ocean currents a long time ago, but when they arrived, there were already species there. So virtually every one of the untouched landscapes that we look at and admire, because they are totally natural, are filled with invasive species. And there's another word for this competition between invasive and native species that we've been talking about for the last 50 years, and it is evolution.
Thank you, Howard. I think, unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions to Howard. I did have one, but I'm going to email it to you, and I think it will be the start of a nice conversation.
Okay, we'll have a wonderful conference. Thank you for inviting me. We'll see you all again soon.
That's great. Yes, I understand that you have other commitments and you have to leave us, but again, thank you very much for the excellent talk. And see you soon next time.
Okay, thanks, Giulia. Bye.
I would like now to introduce the next speaker, who is Giulia Bassani. She's a science fiction writer, one of the new generation of science fiction writers who is writing fascinating things. I think she will say something about her books as well. I see that your microphone is on.
Yes.
Julia, everyone
am I allowed to share my screen?
Yes, you are.
Can I share my screen? I have a presentation. I'm more comfortable with talking with you. That's not a problem.
That's great. Please do share your screen.
Okay. Let me know if you can see it.
I see, right. I see your beauty. That's it. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Cool. So thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and to be talking about science fiction because I'm really interested in this theme, but I would like to introduce me a bit more first. So first of all, I'm Italian. So if my English accent is weird, that's the reason why. Sorry for that. However, I'm studying to become an aerospace engineer at the Polytechnic University of Turin. And I'm also a writer. In fact, I wrote 2 books, which I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about later. And I've been studying the feasibility of human missions to Mars for a few years now, because everything started when I was like 15 or 16 years old, and I took part in a space contest where I developed a project of a base on Mars. And basically everything started there, and I got very passionate about this topic, and I continued to study it and to learn more. And then I also wrote a book to try and apply that kind of knowledge. And now I am a research associate at the Blue Marble Space Institute for Science, and I'm working on a research project about developing and using sustainable technology in human bases on Mars or on the moon or in space in general. So this is my first book. I wrote it when I was 17 years old at Martin 12, and it is in fact a hard science fiction. So as I said, I took part in a space contest with a base on Mars. And after that contest, since I'm very passionate about writing, and writing a book has always been one of my dreams, I wanted to try and apply that knowledge about human missions to Mars in a story, in a real story. And so basically in that period, there were some sagas that were very popular among the younger generation. For example, the Hunger Games or Divergent or the Maze Runner and such things basically. So what I wanted to try and do was make a story that was entertaining like that for young people, for boys and girls, but have it based on Mars, set on Mars, and in a kind of scientific environment, so that people could read and at the same time learn something. Because what's really interesting about books and reading in general is that when we read, we completely enter the story and we start to do what the characters do and know what the characters know and feel what the characters feel. So if they are in an actual scientific background, I'm not sure how to explain that. Basically, we will learn more about that world, and this was what I was trying to do. So basically the plot is we have the first human beings ever born on Mars that are teenagers, and they were in fact born and brought up on Mars inside the base where the crew of astronauts is their only family. The problem is that they have no contact with planet Earth, even though they know that the rest of humanity is out there. So they have a completely different point of view on the whole universe, I would say, and on humanity and on space exploration, because they're on Mars and they start wondering, why are we here? Why were we born here? What are we doing? And so they start going to find the answers to these solutions, to these questions, embarking on an adventure and breaking some rules, because that's what teenagers do. The problem is that Mars is quite a dangerous place where to break the rules, so doing it might be fatal, or anyway pretty dangerous in any case. So what I was trying to do was in fact teaching while entertaining, or entertaining while teaching, having an enthralling story and teach something about spaceflight. And it kind of worked based on what the readers told me, so it was pretty cool. The second book that I wrote is Calopsia, and this isn't a science fiction, but the concept and the mindset that I applied to write is pretty similar. So I wanted to say a word on this too, because so since I'm studying aerospace engineering, obviously I fell in love with aviation as well, and in particular military aviation. So what I was trying to do with this book was to bring the readers into my world of this passion for aviation, and so kind of tell a story that could be relatable to boys and girls of my same age, and bring them in my world so that they could be passionate about aviation and see it the way I saw it, if that makes sense. So the protagonist is a teenage girl that is training to become a military pilot. It's a bit weird because it's set in a dystopian world that doesn't really exist. I invented it all so that it could just serve to the plot. But this is quite different because I read it when I was 20 years old, so a little bit older than the first one, and it's more like deep, as in emotionally, I would say, because I wanted really to grasp the attention, and I'm not even sure how to say it exactly, but basically I was trying to, I mean, with the new sensibility that I had at 20 years old, I was trying to grasp the attention towards other things and still have the readers kind of learn more and get fascinated by the whole world of airplanes, which is basically more or less what we want to do with science through science fiction. So exactly, how do we approach a young public through fiction? This is something that I've been thinking about a lot, because it's something that I'm trying to achieve myself. And here is something that I immediately thought when I first tried to face this issue. And it is, if Harry Potter, for example, was based on science instead of magic, and if it was kind of realistic, imagine how many young people would have been influenced to learn more on the matter and to get closer to science. Because it's crazy, but the Harry Potter is absolutely detailed and accurate about magic, and when you read it, it seems like you actually learn something about magic, which is something that doesn't exist. And so it's crazy. I mean, imagine if that was science. It will have, I think, such a great impact. So after thinking about that, I immediately thought about Star Wars somehow, because Star Wars is a science fiction that, I mean, it's pretty successful and many people like it and enjoy it. I mean, among the younger public. And so I asked a question to my mother, and I asked her if when she was young, she liked Star Wars, the first movies that came out. And she told me yes. And I told her, why did you like Star Wars? And she told me, for the actors. Of course, obviously, that plays a major role, of course. But okay, she also told me the people who were passionate about Star Wars back then were actually passionate about the science fiction of those films, because it was the first time that there were particular effects, and so people were more passionate about it. But then, of course, that wasn't real science, because of course Star Wars isn't real science, even though we're starting it's more science than Harry Potter, if we want to say that. So I asked her if Star Wars was based on actual science somehow, do you think you would have been more interested in learning more about that science? And she told me yes. And she told me maybe it should have been a bit more like The Martian. And The Martian, the way we know it, it's a very particular science fiction it's very, very realistic, even not entirely, but it's really close to reality. The problem with The Martian is that the aim of the public is more adult, more than I would say the younger generations, which is the goal, I would say, if we want to approach younger people to science. So what is the goal that we should achieve? It should be to write great fiction that will be enthralling regardless of their circumstances, and have it based on real science. So what I grasped from the Harry Potter, which is just an example, but it made me understand quite a few things, is that we need to write stories that are relatable for the younger generations. And Harry Potter happens to be incredibly relatable for young people, because we have these students that go to school and things happen, and there are many, many themes that are faced in these books that are very relatable, even though there is magic. But that same way, we can set a story with more scientific background and scientific research as a groundwork. Because I think this way, when a young reader would follow the characters through their stories and feeling like them, they would enter this world and learn more about it. So how do we make the stories more relatable for the young generations of today? I think we should face some current important themes, like, for example, climate, environment, gender equality, violence and harassment, poverty and lack of education, terrorism, and I would say also quarantine, since we are in this period, and quarantine is particular because, for example, astronauts in space are obviously in quarantine, so that's also pretty relatable. These are some of the themes, but there are so many, and I think trying to I would say hide or involve these themes in books that are based on science and still have enthralling stories, this would really grasp the attention of the young generation that would be, how can I say, dragged into the stories and find themselves learning more about science and become curious about science. And I think this is the goal that we should have, and what would be really important, I think. Yes, thank you. That was it.
Thank you very much, Giulia. Again, does anyone have questions for Giulia? Chaitanya, is what you wrote in the chat a question for Giulia? I don't know, but maybe it is. So Giulia, could you read the text in the chat and say something about that?
They said it's for everyone, however.
Just answer it.
Yeah, that's interesting about modern physics and alchemy. Yeah, it's not really a question, it's just a point. Yeah.
Right. Any other question for Giulia?
Yes, Giulio, it's also not a question, but a comment. When you talk about Calopsia and you talk about military aviation, what you like it so much, I think that is an important point, because we thinking in advance to other talks today about politics and importance of the state in the futurist civilization. I think that all people who consider ourselves as cosmists, we are basically pacifist people. But pacifist is don't need to be naive. So I think that it's very important and very realistic to have that point of view that you have, Giulia, about those things related to defense that will be an important item in the state and in the civilization of the future. That is the comment. Thank you.
Yes, I would just say, like, my passion for military aviation is more related to, I would say, the technicality and the engineering behind those aerospace machines, because as I study aerospace engineering, that's the way I see it. And then it also brings a conflict to the story that it's interesting to explore, literally speaking.
Other questions?
I think this was fascinating, Giulia. Really, appreciate your talk, and you made some excellent points about, the Harry Potter analogy. I thought was just great. And I think we can get that passion for science going. And in media and awareness and for young people. I think something that's missing, or maybe something that I could add to this, is just the effects on the mind, the brain, and the psychological aspects of being in space and getting people interested in that. And one thing I'd like to bring up is the movie. We've got an astronaut on Mars who's raising plants to survive, and he never talked to the plants. I thought that was weird, and I thought they were missing a huge opportunity for him to just get really weird, because like anybody, especially if you're a botanist, if you're in space and all you had are these little plant babies, you're going to start to treat them like humans. Yeah. Anyway, that kind of the awareness of our interconnectedness, and maybe hallucinogens becoming more accepted in society, and then going back to native roots and ayahuasca ceremonies and these kinds of things happening in space are fascinating to me. So anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree.
Other questions? So I have a quick one. You mentioned some features that science fiction aimed at young people should have. And could you give us some example of that? Perhaps some young writers whom we should read, besides you, of course.
I'm afraid I don't know other young writers right now. I'm looking for them as well, but I don't personally know any other young writers.
Let's all look for them. Other questions for Giulia?
We could go for some old writers too. I mean, there's so much historical science fiction over the years, and I think we all realize that we may hit a point as a species where age doesn't matter anymore, and so or youth could be sort of looked at differently, and we could be drawing on this huge knowledge base that's out there.
So I guess there is no other questions following this talk, and I'm supposed to follow with the next speaker, who is Philippe van Nedervelde. But I've been thinking that perhaps if the following speaker, who is Yalda Mousavinia, wants to switch places with Philippe, that could also be an option. So let me just ask Yalda if she's here.
Yeah.
I think she is, because she switched her welcome on. So Yalda, how about trading places with Philippe?
Yeah, that works for me.
That works for you. Okay, that works for Philippe and that works for me. And I think that works for everyone. So I'd like to introduce Yalda Mousavinia, who is an activist in space, cryptocurrencies, decentralized autonomous organizations, all sort of futurist social experiments that could make our life better one day soon enough. Let me just ask everyone else to mute their microphone, and Yalda, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna try sharing my screen now. Share screen, desktop. Okay. You can see this okay, everyone? Yes, so the name of this talk is kind of a statement, and it's we need a new counterculture movement if we want freedom, privacy, peace, and self-actualization. I spend a lot of my time thinking about both dystopia and utopia, and a lot of these thoughts and ideas do come from science fiction, reading or watching these different dystopias. Well, in modern sci-fi, most portrayal of the future is highly dystopian. But we did have a period of Star Trek where there were still exploring, sometimes encountering different species and there being conflicts and that sort of thing. But in general, Earth was like a very futuristic place, and Earth was a more like united planet, and there was the United Federation of Planets. So I am very, very inspired by that, like Roddenberry's portrayal of the future and of a more like united world. I guess a little bit of background about me in general. I was born in California, but my parents, they're from Iran. They came to Iran. I mean, they came from Iran to California in the late 1970s, but actually both of them have recently moved back to Iran. I lived in California for most of my life, and then a couple of years ago, I started to feel more like disconnected with the technology scene there that I was working in Silicon Valley. And I moved to Berlin. I've been working in the cryptocurrency industry, and I started to feel like the mentality in Europe and in Berlin seemed more progressive than what I sensed as more of like a hyper capitalist mode of production that was in San Francisco and Silicon Valley where I was living. So I moved to Berlin because I've been, I guess, just trying to follow like brain waves that kind of feel more on this like utopian post-capitalism, post-money path versus the just like keeping the machine going of like what I feel is more of like this like dystopian world that is being funded and created by the venture capitalists and in Silicon Valley and throughout, kind of like sugar coated as, oh, we want to make the world a better place. But then I think that there are fundamentally a lot of things that people should be doing if they really believe that they aren't when it comes to creating businesses. And I think that relates to actually like the business structure that you choose. I think that traditional corporations where you're not giving your workers a voice, where you're not giving people like a vote, like ownership, I think that that is basically what is holding us back partially towards getting towards more of post-capitalist states of work. So I'm a person who believes a lot in cooperatives, cooperative businesses, cooperative principles, and in my mind, that is what I think is one of the solutions that we need whenever it comes to business and whenever it comes to how we want to transform business. And in addition to cooperatives, I think that nonprofits are very important because I guess I'm leaning more towards the path of it's not trusting the government to fully solve our problems, but starting to think for, well, how can we create these non-governmental, global, large-scale nonprofits that can actually get to the systemic root of a lot of our issues, which are global. And that's why it's like if we try to solve problems as a single country, we know that doesn't get us there, get us like as far as we need. So throughout like the past 4 years, I've been working in this like cryptocurrency ecosystem, and one of the reasons that I started actually researching more decentralized autonomous organizations was because of an article that Giulia wrote, who invited me to this talk. We had a project together called Space Decentral, and that's about creating a space agency that is for the people, by the people, and powered by blockchain and cryptocurrency as a way to make decisions and share value as a global network. That idea was proposed around 2017, and I think that it was ahead of the time back then. But I think right around now, in like 2021, I'm starting to kind of sense and observe that we are getting closer to, I hope, that vision starting to come to life. And throughout the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk more about like the evolution of that idea of creating a decentralized citizen-led space program. So what I think is going to be one of the first steps to get us in that direction, which is this new project that I'm working on now called Azimuth. And it's an engine to help minimize dystopian futures. So it's a new recurring event that will first start taking place solely in the virtual world. But then in the post-pandemic future, I'm hoping that it will start to have a more physical real world component. And the first event is actually going to be next week, and it's very last minute. We haven't even started promoting yet because there are so many different moving parts, but actually the announcement will be happening later today. But it's inspired by ancient symposiums where music and performance was more integrated with intellectual discourse. So back in 2008, I was living in San Francisco, and I was also, or 2006, 2007. I was just like, there was like a music scene there, like a lot of people that are, DJs or in like bands and throwing raves, this kind of countercultural scene that I was a part of there. And I think for most of my life, I've been trying to figure out like, how can we actually bring together the arts community more with the technology community? It's like, how can this happen? Because I think that if we can combine these two, we can actually start, we can start real movements again. Like there was, I think that there was more of this this merger between the arts and technology during the days when the internet was created. And so it's like, I guess I read about like the history of the internet and the counterculture. And I wasn't, I wasn't alive then to live through it fully. But I think I dream of it, just like I dream about space. So this event is kind of my attempt at trying to recreate what I think, that spirit of like the early days of the internet, where whenever you create events, it's about like kind of bringing people together, sharing ideas, like doing like a cross collaboration of industries and people, and especially like, how can we like merge the arts more with technology to inspire people. So one of the things that we're going to have, we're calling this, like at this event, like the Cosmosis Space Opera. It's like, what is a space opera? It's a subgenre of science fiction that emphasizes space warfare, melodramatic adventure, interplanetary battles, et cetera, et cetera. I think that like the world we live in right now, it actually is, it is like a space opera. It's very, there are all these different, forces going on, and we're trying to kind of navigate through it. So we're saying it's like the Cosmosis Space Opera, but in some ways it's kind of the space opera that we're currently living in. And I think it's very, kind of like, oh, the Galactic Federation, these sorts of things. It's like, okay, wow, like this is reality. And the way that it's going to work, we don't know, like this is like the longer term vision. It's still like a lot of the pieces are still coming together, but we want to do something where like where there will be an exquisite corpse type method, where each collaborator is they know a component of the story, and then they add their piece to it, but they still have their kind of independent, autonomous universe of their artist and of like the creativity that they're getting. And then there will be like different sequences for how we do the transitions as well. So yeah, I guess it's called Cosmosis because it's like cosmos, the universe as a well-ordered whole, osmosis, like usually an effortless but often unconscious assimilation of information, and then gnosis, knowledge of spiritual mysteries and an altered state of consciousness which bypasses the conscious mind. And that's the other thing that we do want to kind of bring to light more in this event is creating a sort of forum where it is like okay to start to talk about the unknown, to talk about religion, but to also like just like bring people together that usually don't like talking about it, that where they're very uncomfortable, they're very like secretive, private about it, and kind of help people also kind of break outside of that mold. Because I think that in like the scientific and engineering community, that sometimes it's like very taboo to talk about these different topics, but artists, they explore and they talk about a lot of like these topics much more comfortably. But it's very fascinating, like how uncomfortable a lot of people are when it comes to actually talking about what your perception of the universe is. and what your perception of like reality is. So I've always been very interested in how do we open up that conversation more, because I think that that is a component of like countercultural shifts and ideas and like just how like the world works. It's like we should be having these conversations. These are the most important conversations that we should be talking about and starting to reach like new global consensus on. So yeah, I guess it's like the other thing about this Cosmosis space opera. It's a futuristic battle between the polarities of light and dark as we are accelerated into the future. So the musical performers and other participants will decipher cosmic information downloads to best suit their aims, and choosing to either ascend to a new age or descending deeper into darkness. That copy there is a bit too dystopian and cryptic, but I guess the way that I think that the world and consciousness works is like, you know, I'm someone who has like studied engineering, but I also do, you know, write poems and try to make music. And I think that a lot of us have that have that creative, that artist within us, but we don't really allow access to it just because, and this is a symptom basically of work and kind of like just people being so exhausted to like work like, oh, these deep work weeks and just, you know, make money that like you like just lose touch with your actual like higher self and your being and like the creative part of you. And I think that's basically like maybe a worse like one of a different kind of pandemic that is going on in the world. But I think that like it's like how can we actually allow like more people to realize that they do have an artist within them. Like I hope that we can start to kind of inspire that with this event and this conversations and starting to bring together the arts and like scientific or engineering or skeptical communities more. So let's see, I've been talking for, has it been like 15 or 20 minutes so far? How am I looking for time?
Just take all the time you want.
Okay. Okay, so the different components that this is going to have is live musical performances, theatrical videos, chats, talks and interviews, and it's going to start to take place in this like sort of metaverse like environment that's called Astris. So we'll have, you know, different like art gallery, and then you'll go in there, and then there'll be like a portal that you take to start to go to the stage where the live music is happening. And the other component, longer term component, I'm not sure if this will happen for the first event, but basically a lot of times, you know, you might go to a conference and someone's like giving a talk and they're like, oh, okay, like, you know, maybe you'll follow up and collaborate with that person, maybe not, but we want to make it like easier for that pathway to happen, to kind of have people that are working on technology projects or nonprofits that we're curating that we think are important, and then allow pathways for participants to then get more involved in those projects or, you know, donate money to them, what have you. So it's just kind of like how can we actually create like very like constructive and action oriented environments and encourage this more like cross collaboration, you know, melding of ideas and what have you. And so one of the things that that I think is like the one of I guess like this is the like let's talk more about like the financial component of this event and of this conference. Like I wish that just didn't have to like figure out ways to make money, and you can just do these events and it's amazing and it's awesome. But I think that until, well, as we still exist in this this system of capital and needing to kind of pay for things and pay for food, you know, we're not in that utopia yet. We need to kind of figure out a program that can start to get us there. So I've wanted to like design something where we can start to basically generate revenue, but without having to raise money from venture capitalists or to like give away like ownership of the project to like external people that aren't directly involved. So I guess that's the good thing about organizing a virtual event, because like at least like the costs are pretty low. And it's like you can just really experiment with if you can offer people like something that they might find value in. And if they keep coming, then you're like, okay, well, maybe you also figure out a new way to distribute the revenue with the artists involved too, like the musicians. In the traditional festival world, like, you know, whenever you're booking an artist or a DJ, you just kind of like give a fee, like a flat fee. You don't do a profit share. But what we want to do is something different. Is the profit will be shared with the artists, with the technologists. So you are starting to not have it as, oh, the artists or performers are like an agent to the business and then they get the money. It's like, no, it's like it's actually trying to bring people more together. And because I think that like we need to kind of be more in touch with the arts, with the critics, with people that actually think more about like ethics and that sort of thing too, as we design like these future technological systems that are more aligned with our human rights. So it's like that's basically like, I think that one of the problems with technology today is they're designed for, I mean, a lot of the technology, it prioritizes profit as opposed to our human rights, you know, but we use it because it's just, everyone does they just build the same patterns, data collection, et cetera. But more and more, it's just like, we're just kind of like giving away a lot of our freedom for this like convenience. But I think that we need to basically break away from that. And the only way that we can break away from that is if the stakeholders involved in this like collective, this enterprise, are not in it to maximize profits, but they're in it to make sure that the technology roadmap of the future is aligned with our human rights. So it's like, okay, you can have a for-profit type component, but it is a social enterprise at the end of the day. It recognizes that traditional like profit maximizing modes of doing business, building technology, et cetera, will not get us to the future that we need to get to. So this initial like system that like we had to come up with a system very quickly because this was like kind of rushed together. It's very I guess flat in the beginning. It'll probably change a little bit, but for each participant that was involved, we were like, okay, well, which tier do you think you fall in? And a tier roughly amounts to like how many hours they think it's going to take for them to do their part, whether it's an act or whether it's like building some code. And then we basically just, then you have like the team of the different people, the tiers, and then if the event turns a profit, then everyone involved will get a little slice of that. So that's one experiment we're doing. Something we're not really going to be advertising or anything because we're not. But I'm just sharing this in this meeting right now because it's more about like a potential like solution for how we can start to kind of think about money and money differently whenever it comes to events, and then you basically can like create then stronger incentives with the collective of people to then spread the word about the event, et cetera, because then everyone is a stakeholder. So that is one of the financial experiments we're going to be doing. We'll see if it works or if it doesn't work. But yeah, so that was just an overview of Azimuth, and yeah, so this is basically I feel like I started to have ideas for something like this back in 2008, and it's basically taken about 12 years to figure out like how to really do it right and to inspire the right team to kind of come together to do it. And unfortunately, like the pandemic in some ways, like I don't know if this wouldn't have happened if we weren't in this like lockdown mode. So it's very weird, in some ways, it's very weird where it seems like something like your dream project was only maybe possible because of this very unfortunate thing in the world. But here, and I guess that is the conclusion for this talk. If there are any questions, let me know.
Thank you very much, Yalda. Well, can you just read the question in the chat box from
Oh, yes.
Committee? In the meantime, I will be making a couple of comments. So you read the question, then you read it aloud, and then you comment. It's an interesting one. Yalda has invited me to participate in the first version of this azimuth thing. First time I asked her, okay, what is it about? She explained it to me and I didn't understand. So I asked her again and again to explain it to me, and I didn't understand. I have enjoyed this talk very much, but I'm afraid to say that perhaps I still don't understand what it is exactly that Yalda wants to do. But that's not a bad thing. You know, as they say, things, good things happen when we are kind of pushed out of our comfort zone. This definitely pushes me out of my comfort zone, but I'll do my best to contribute and to do everything that Yalda will ask me to do. I'd like to invite everyone to think of other questions for Yalda, and in the meantime, perhaps you can read and discuss the question of Committee.
Yes, so the question says, in astronism, we see religion, spirituality, philosophy as being central to establishing the foundations of space exploration. Does my own spiritual or religious identity connect to outer space or space exploration? Yes, 100% for sure. And I think that that's maybe one thing that I didn't get too deep on in the talk, but I very much aligned with, I think that it is our nature to want to explore and see the stars, because I think that well I mean, I guess my conception of like what is like my soul and like where my soul comes from, like I think that it's like it comes from something before me being born on Earth, so it is connected to the cosmos. So I think that I always try to question, it's like, why do I have this deep desire to leave this planet? I'm like, is it because of something like deeper in my soul, or is it because I've watched all this sci-fi? And that's something that I'm trying to kind of figure out day by day, if I've been programmed by the media to want to leave this planet, or if it's just kind of the human nature of my DNA. But I feel very much programmed to want to explore outer space.
There is another question in the chat. There are other two, as a matter of fact. Read and comment.
I am familiar with Burning Man events, communities, but I'm not that connected to I guess a lot of the people that organize you know, Burning Man events or communities. I was starting to, like, I just wanted to start at like a very initial level of like, okay, who are the artists that I want to start to just showcase, or who are like the speakers that I want to start to showcase. And like, I've just been focusing a lot on the curation of that, as opposed to seeing like, oh, who are people that have done virtual events that I can learn from for how to do it better. So I've just been so focused in the curation, and like with like the time, like I really wanted to do this event on December 20th, 21st. Actually, one thing that I didn't get too deep into in the talk was, so in Iran, there's the winter solstice. They call the winter solstice event Shabe Yalda, the night of Yalda. So I was named after the winter solstice, but I didn't want to put my name on this event. But But it is about like exploring light and dark, and so it's like it was very important to just try to see if we can make this event happen on the 20th, but we haven't even started promoting it. It's and that's why it's just like, okay, well, we will have succeeded and at least bring these awesome people together that and we'll see what happens after that. So I mean, I already feel like it is a success because of all these amazing people have agreed to be a part of it. And yeah, so but I think that in 2021 hopefully there's more time to make things even better.
There's another interesting question about what should one do on a personal level to end up in a utopia.
What should one do on a personal level to end up in a utopia? I think first, believing that it is possible. Second, starting to create, like just be a part of a community, create a community on Earth that is kind of like one. So that's the other path that I'm trying to figure out as far as the physical world is. Like I said, I'm very inspired by the 60s counterculture and like back to land movement, whole Earth catalog. I'm just like, trying to search right now for where to kind of start to create this like alternative community and like create something like the Black Mountain College. And so yeah, I mean, I think that we should just start to create pockets of utopia on Earth. It's so possible. Like we need to just like learn. I want to like learn how to grow food and that sort of thing. So that's like this other kind of calling I have right now. It's like for the past few years, a lot of it was like space, but now I'm like, okay, well, if you want to build a spaceport, you need some place on Earth. So where is that land going to be on Earth, where it's not just like you're building a traditional headquarters for a company or a rocket launch company, but you're building really like an alternative, like futuristic community. And yeah, I mean, I think that, what Elon Musk is doing for space, it's good, it's important, it inspired me in a lot of ways. But then whenever I see the news about like how the rockets are going to be used to like transport weapons, like I'm just like, what? Like this like military industrial complex of space exploration. I'm like, I think that we need like a company that is a space company that's not part of the military industrial complex, like that is just pure, that does not in the business of killing other humans, So that's just like that's why I'm like, I was talking a lot before about like my nationality before. It's like, okay, I was born in America. My parents are from Iran. I was living in Germany. Now I'm in like Ibiza. I'm like, I don't fucking have a nationality. I don't know. I'm just like, I'm a human. So whenever you see like China going to the moon and they're like putting the flag on, I'm like, really? We're still stuck in this kind of flag waving world. I'm like, that's not how you get to Star Trek. Like, so I'm just trying to figure out like, okay, like just what is the human? I feel like I'm a human. Like I do have like ties to like, yeah, America and Iran, but like, I'm like, I can't, like, I don't have a flag that I'm waving. Like, so that's where I feel kind of frustrated right now with like this kind of like utopia. I'm like, okay, well, where is it going to be on Earth if I'm going to start to create a community? I'm like, where do I belong? I don't know. Trying to figure that out.
Other questions for Yalda?
Okay. We'll still be allowed to have our own. Okay.
May I ask, or you have more questions in the chat first?
There was a question that was sent to me in private. Was that for me to answer publicly?
No, it's to everyone. The one from Chaitanya is to everyone.
Oh. Do some of us, is that question for me?
I think it is.
Allowed to have our own sandbox in the metaverse? Yeah, so the goal with this metaverse is definitely this is, yeah, how other people, I think of it like kind of like the comic book world, like if you think of DC, or what's it called? Like Avengers or something, where it's just like, you have like one comic that kind of brings together a lot of other people's stories, but then people do have their like own universes too. So I think that is what I see as kind of like the future vision of this, is like people can start to have like different like brands and identities for their universes or their way or their thinking of like what reality is like. And then you also like start to encourage like different people to come together and create and converge new realities. So yeah, definitely that is the longer term vision. And I guess the other thing that I didn't get a chance to get into was what I think the future of creating a decentralized space program will be. And I think that will be more of a game. Like right now you have EVE Online or Kerbal Space Program, these very popular space games with lots of users, but people are spending all this time like working on these games, but they're not actually like, it's just like a game. It's like, but it's like, wait, what if it was like a game, but the different things people were working and building on actually then contributed to something real? So I think that is where the future is headed in the next few years. And I see that connected to the same like metaverse like world where you're creating things that are like really simulating real physics, really simulating real space missions. And that's how you start to kind of draw attention to them and then draw funding to them. Because like people can start to experience them, and it's cheaper to build and prototype in the virtual world and then offer experiences through like media or storytelling.
I think we have time for 2 more questions to Yalda. In the meantime, do you have a website where one can read about the progress that you're making with this Azimuth thing?
There is a website that we're going to be plugging in a way to get some tickets later.
Azimuth.voyage.
Yes. So it's very basic right now, but it's kind of under production. But if you go there in the next 24 hours, there will start to be more information for putting your name on an email list or to purchase a ticket, etc.
That's a good one. Another point, you discussed a lot how people should participate in this kind of next generation initiatives. But, so many people, they have so many things to do. They don't have any special skill. They don't especially like to interact with big communities. I think many people just want to follow something, watch something, be told interesting things. What do you have to offer to this kind of people who I believe do represent the majority of people?
Yeah, so I mean, it'll be similar to a conference where you can go and listen and you don't have to say anything. So, so there is always that component for more of the observer like person, and then people can be a part of it for the entertainment or the learning. And then if you choose later, you want to also be a part of one of the projects, you could go down that path, but you don't have to.
I think Ruben wants to say something.
Yes, thank you, Giulio. It's not a question, it's a comment. Your talk, Yalda, is very inspiring in a lot of themes, and I want to take that of the importance of thinking in the development of art in futurism, because we have no doubt about the exponential progress of technology. But we need people like you that is thinking about the development of art together with technology, because art will be needed for having a happy future, for having a joyful future for humanity. If we have an asymmetry between the development of technology and the development of art, we will be in danger of not having so happy future. And you talk also about other so important themes like cooperativism, no profits organizations, crypto, and the financial model. The financial model is so important because surely in any future that we arrive, we will need to have a job, and there will be the need for work politics, for work laws, and that financial model. I don't know if it will be post-capitalism or capitalism or how it will be, but we will need a model, and that is also so important. And finally, when I talk about the talk of Giulia in the previous, and we talk about military and defense and so on, and pacifism. When I talk about defense, I were not thinking in human troubles between humans, but other concept of defense, as you talk also in space opera, we don't know if we are alone in the universe. So defense will be important in that way, not in conflict between humans. Thank you.
Very good point, and thank you for the comments.
So thank you very much, Yalda. And now I will hand over to the next speaker. The next speaker is someone whose name is often mentioned in connection to all kinds of emerging as futuristic technologies. Philippe van Nedervelde has been very active in different sectors like virtual reality, nanotechnology, and of course space. Over to you, Philippe.
Thank you, Giulia. So I'm going to present with some slides. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. If you can make it full screen at your end, that will enable you to see it, to see the slides in full detail. So my talk will be about the meeting of two cultures, you could say, and it is about cyberspace meeting outer space. Or an alternative title of my talk is What is Happening at the Intersection of Social Virtual Reality, also known as Multi-User Virtual Worlds, and the Building of the Metaverse and Cyberspace, as the previous speaker has spoken about, and New Space, which is the name given to the space industry that is today, with the new impetus that SpaceX and others and Blue Origin by Bezos have given to the entire space field and the return to the moon and Mars and all of that. Yet another title of this talk is that it is the true story of how the space settlement movement, a cultural phenomenon, is merging with the cyberspace settlement movement. So I would like to tell you this story by means of the life story, or using that as a thread, of someone who is and has always been a member of both of these movements and subcultures, namely me. On the left, this is me back when I had hair. And so thank you, Giulia, for your introduction earlier. I am indeed a 30-year veteran of the virtual reality industry. That's my bread and butter business. I'm the founder and CEO of eSpaces, which is, to my knowledge, the world's oldest continuously operated virtual reality studio. And I have also been a lifelong space buff. Here you see me on the arm of my late father. In 1969, my father made sure and told me several times that he made sure that I would witness with my own eyes on the television, live as it happened, Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon and making this historic leap forward for mankind. So, of course, I wanted to be an astronaut. Of course, I ever since have aspired to go to space and settle space and explore space. Fast forward to when I was 12, and I joined the local space and astronomy club called Sirius. And there, within a year after my joining it, in 1980, I founded my first organization, the Belgian Space Information Center. And so I also, not long thereafter, in 1981, started dabbling as a precocious space journalist. And this is my very first published article, which was an interview with Fred Hayes, astronaut Fred Hayes, in 1981, published nationally in Belgium. So this slide I'm gonna skip. In 1982, almost the same year, William Gibson coined in his short story, Burning Chrome, and later he expanded on it in Neuromancer, he coined the word cyberspace. And he said that he described it as a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions of legitimate operators, a graphical representation of data abstracted from the banks of every computer in the human system, unthinkable complexity, lines of light ranged in the non-space of the mind, clusters and constellations of data. I read those novels back then and was enormously inspired by them. In parallel, I was also dabbling with amateur rocketry. This is me launching one of those Estes space shuttle rocket kits. And then fast forward still, at the end of my secondary education, I wasn't even 17 years old. I published my very first international article in English in Astronomy magazine of May 1986. It was a title, so the piece was mentioned on the cover, and this was the spread of the piece. I basically gave an overview of Europe's place in space, what is Europe doing in space flight, and where does Europe belong in the space race at that time? Or there wasn't any space race at the time. But a year later, so this is 1986, a year later, I saw in a newsstand this issue of Scientific American, which published, this was really the coming out of virtual reality as a technology, with showing the data glove on the cover of Scientific American. And so that inspired me with all that I had read in William Gibson and in science fiction. That inspired me to go and study up and read up on this technology from the moment I saw it in Scientific American. To my delight, I learned that it is actually NASA who is at the cradle, or who inspired the modern form of virtual reality with headsets, because they contracted with a company called VPL to make the data glove and the headset in order to use virtual reality and develop virtual reality for the training of astronauts, especially for EVAs. And on the right of this slide, you see a female astronaut in the ISS using a VR headset for some experiments. So NASA has kept using virtual reality ever since. And so they use these neutral buoyancy rigs and tanks for doing EVA training, but they also do EVA training this way without going all the way into the spacesuit and in the water tank, but using the highest quality virtual reality headsets. These are very bulky ones because they're some years old, and that's how bulky they needed to be in order to have relatively high resolution graphics. So moving on, in 1992, I was at university by that time. And no, actually, I had already left university and was just out of my military service. There is a new wave of cyberpunk, which is epitomized by Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, where he gives his own interpretation of the Gibsonian cyberspace and calls it the metaverse. All of that, I was getting into the workspace, and so I didn't like being an employee. I only was an employee for like 6 months or so of a new media company, multimedia company. But then I founded, I soon after that left and continued working for that company as a self-employed person. But I founded my virtual reality company, eSpaces. Actually, in 1991, I had already started doing my first VR project. I don't have a slide of that, but it was called CyberTerm, short for Cyberspace Terminal. And I was doing the user interface design and some work on the 3D graphics engine for a company out of Adelaide in Australia. And the goal of the project was, you've guessed it, the implementation in reality of the Gibsonian cyberspace and the Neil Stephensonian metaverse. So one of the first projects of eSpaces was the design, together with another friend of mine, of a virtual reality interface for what many people used before the World Wide Web, which was CompuServe. So, and that was called VIS's, Visual CIS CompuServe Interface System. And I presented that as the subject of my very first presentation at a VR conference in New York in 1993 or so. And then we're moving further on this thread of the development of the metaverse and cyberspace. So in 1998, I got commissioned to do a multi-user world called Virtual Europe. I was paid to do that, or my company and I were paid to do that by the European Commission. And in the top left corner, you can see in small the avatars of Tony Blair, who was then the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and Jacques Santer, the then President of the European Commission. And so we had them walk through their avatars, walk through this virtual ribbon that we had set up to inaugurate the Virtual Europe. And that was done with 17 different language interfaces. And you see the graphics are quite clunky. More social virtual worlds that we did was also for children. So we created a very safe world for children that is completely fairy tale themed. And that was featured on the cover of one of the magazines of the SIGGRAPH conferences. And so they could go in there, multi-user, and go on treasure hunts in this fairy tale wonderland. In 2000, we won our first award for in the field of virtual reality for the best virtual reality application at the VR World Conference in Barcelona for the Munich Airport Center that you see here. Again, multi-user using VRML, the equivalent for 3D content of HTML at the time. And it came complete with commercial applications like this Audi store and then the business center. A big seminal moment for us, but also in the pour la petite histoire of the development of the metaverse and cyberspace, was our launch in 2001 of iCity. And basically this was very similar to Second Life. but focused on the Jewish diaspora. So it had an interface in Hebrew and in English, and it was a very sprawling, open-ended social virtual world where people could go and set up, buy an apartment or rent a house in the kibbutz or in Old Jaffa or in a modern version of Petach Tikva near Tel Aviv. And so you had dance nightclubs, all of the stuff that you may remember from Second Life. And you had shopping malls, and you had an internal currency, and all of that goodness. Okay, moving forward, in 2006, unbeknownst to me at that time, was published Lunar Explorer. And so this was a big first in the field of virtual reality for space buffs and for the space settlement movement, because the very first time on your consumer PC, you could have fully immersive as well as a flat screen access to virtual, a complete version of the moon, complete with all of the landing sites of the Apollo missions, the Surveyor missions, and the Luna missions. And so this is Lunar Explorer being showed to, on the top left is Bert Rutan, who you may remember. And so again, look at the old clunky VR headset that was used for accessing virtual moon. By the way, Lunar Explorer. Okay, moving on. I was living in Tenerife by that time. In 2001, a local researcher in astrophysicist founded, together with Brian May of Queen, the Starmus event, and I attended the event because, I mean, it was local, but it was star-studded with not only Brian May, who played, his Last Horizon song live one evening, and then there was Charlie Duke, and we all went up on the Mount Teide for a observation of the stars using augmented reality on my tablet at the time. And so that was kind of a point where I started going back towards my passion for spaceflight and looking to combine it with my other passion for virtual reality and augmented reality. In 2017, the European Space Agency, together with Jeffrey Hoffman, who by then was no longer a NASA astronaut, but Jeffrey did 5 shuttle flights, was on 5 shuttle flights, including the ones that repaired the Hubble Space Telescope. And he did EVAs for repairing the Hubble Space Telescope together with Story Musgrave. So the European Space Agency, together with Hoffman and SOM, which is a world-renowned architecture firm based in New York, they built the following. They built a completely thoroughly engineered and architected design for a first village on the moon, and it's called Moon Village. To make a long story short, I mean, this is an aerial view of a fully fledged moon village. And this shows a side view, including the habitation module that I want to draw your attention to. You see this tall one here? Well, when the group who created the moon village was approached by the Venice Biennale to display a physical replica of the habitat, the 4 stories high habitat, they said yes. And so they are, and this was going to be shown physically in the Venice Biennale earlier this year. But due to the pandemic, it was canceled. But we were approached by the group to produce the augmented reality views out of the windows on the lower floor of this physical replica. So the replica was real. This is an artist rendering of one of the higher floors for habitation, and this is the lower floor. So in Venice, at the Biennale, people would be able to walk through the ground floor, the interior ground floor of the space habitat. And then when they would be looking out of those long vertical windows, e-spaces would be showing the view of the rest of the village, animated with astronauts walking around, with swarms of robots doing exploration and digging. And so that was, for us, the first moment. We will, by the way, still do this. The Venice Biennale has been moved to next year. And so in May, I believe, what we have prepared for this will go live in Venice. And that really, for me personally, was the convergence, the merging of my passion, for space and space settlement with virtual reality. But it inspired me to go and see what else we could do for the new space industry. And we ended up, we are in production on multiple projects now and in discussion with multiple projects. And so for the new space industry, we soon found out that there are numerous use cases for virtual reality and augmented reality and for cyberspace, for multi-user virtual worlds, beyond just the training of mission team members and astronaut EVA training. So the new space industry needs simulators for mission planning. They need digital twins to solve urgent issues during a mission. Like, for example, they actually had kind of a physical twin of the Apollo service module during the problem solving of Apollo 13. And so, but now with VR, we would have instead of physical simulators to go and check out solutions, we have fully realized digital twins, including simulation of physics. But also, the space industry now needs wants live virtual reality tracking of mission progress. They want to do outreach, public relations, and public education via virtual reality. For example, SpaceX, just before the demo flight that took the Dragon with the 2 astronauts to the space station the first time, they offered on their website a small simulator where in flat screen mode, but in virtual reality, you could try your hand at docking by hand the Dragon capsule to the International Space Station. And finally, or additionally, another use case is the colonization and the settling of space in virtual reality, using virtual reality as a dress rehearsal for going to space and settling space and starting the homesteading of space. And on that point comes the project that we are now in production in, and that is Virtual Moon. This really is the reincarnation of the project that I mentioned before, because Manuel Pimenta, the person who was behind the Lunar Explorer project, well, he and we found each other, and he has rekindled his project because some things were not achievable back then, and now he wants to do it better and fully photorealistically with real-time ray tracing and all of that. And so, and the reincarnation of Lunar Explorer is called Virtual Moon, and it will be a co-production between Virtual Moon LLC and eSpaces. We already have, and you may want to take note of this URL, we already have a sneak preview that is working on the web because we are using WebXR technology for this, which I can get to, which I can go into greater detail about in the Q&A if we have time for that. And so moon.espaces.com, there we have the following. I will show you by means of this pre-recorded video. One WebXR project that we are presently working on and that I have particular pride in presenting to you is the reincarnation of a project that was done in 2006, published in 2006 by a company called Virtuplay, and it was called Lunar Explorer. At the time, it was a major achievement in virtual reality for the space industry because then and until this day, it is the only published virtual reality simulation that features the entire moon. You can visit the entire moon with Lunar Explorer. So what we are doing is we are now reincarnating all of the features of Lunar Explorer in WebXR and adding many, many more new features, such as multi-user access mode. So Virtual Moon is the name of the reincarnation of the project. And right now it is under construction. As you can see in the live demo on that screen, we have already recreated in WebXR, in VR, the south pole of the moon at a URL that you can access, which is moon.espaces.com. And the simulation allows you to navigate freely using your cursor keys and your mouse or the WASD keys all over the south pole of the moon. Here at the bottom, you see that there's a slider. When you move that slider around, you change the location of the sun. So you have dynamic shadows that are being shown correctly moving over the elevation on the lunar surface. We also have buttons left and right, which enable you to navigate to other viewpoints on above the lunar south pole. And with several keys, we can toggle some features in and out. For example, if we toggle on the L key, we show labels appearing over all of the salient features of the lunar south pole. If we toggle the I key, we can see an overlay of the water ice deposits on the south pole of the moon. And this, of course, can be very helpful in mission planning for moon missions. Let's navigate to one particular feature on the south pole called Mons Malapert, or Malapert Mountain. This is, to my knowledge, either the tallest mountain on the moon or one of the tallest mountains on the moon. And it permanently has some part of it in sunshine. And the people who commissioned us with building Virtual Moon asked us to also build inside of the very top of Malapert Mountain a city of several thousand occupants, which would be kind of a resort city on the moon. And we will be making a completely virtual digital twin of this city, complete in every engineering detail for air supply, for power generation, and all of that. When I mentioned earlier that Virtual Moon will also be multi-user, what I meant is that you will be able, once we are done, to go and virtually settle or homestead or have a stay inside of the virtual Malapert city and explore the moon in virtual reality. And this illustrates one of the ways that virtual reality can offer you the next best thing to being there. The simulation will be fully photorealistic with ray tracing done probably for people who are on low-powered hardware. The ray tracing and photorealistic high frame rate rendering will be done in the cloud, and using a 5G or better connection, you will be able to enjoy highly photorealistic, high frame rate imagery in your virtual reality headset or on your device. So that is coming up, and we are fully in production on the virtual moon as well as Malapert City, the virtual Malapert City. Again, Malapert City will be done in such detail that at some point we will be able to just print out the blueprints or the architectural engineering, the CAD models, so as to be able to create Malapert City on the actual moon. So in that way, the virtual Malapert City will be a kind of a training ground for the real Malapert City on the real moon. So here is another view of an artist impression of astronauts at the top of Malapert Mountain, and with work going on below. This is another artist impression of the view, the picture window out of the main corridor of what is now, by the way, changed to, so Malapert City will not be the name anymore. We will call it Selene, after the Greek goddess for the moon. And so the main corridor will be right through the top of Mount Malapert, and there will be a huge central aula where in virtual reality, you know, we will recreate this, and there will be a conference center. It will be kind of a resort city, a virtual reality resort city for thousands of inhabitants, with concerts, with conferences, with exhibitions, with a VR space museum, with the ability to go and fly in the low gravity of the moon using just flapping wings. And so this project is very much in production now, and we will be raising the funds or funds for the future phases of the project by means of issuing a token. So the previous speaker mentioned cryptocurrencies, etc. And the virtual moon will have the lunar as LUNAR as its in-world currency, with which you will be able to pay the rent on your condo inside of Selene, etc. Now, the project is going to be larger than just the moon. We will start with building the Earth-Moon-Sun system, and we will then add, for instance, a space colony also for homesteading at the L5 point. I'm working together with Keith Henson, the founder or co-founder of the L5 Society, that was later turned into the National Space Society in the United States. But these are, by the way, not our own art renders, but by Brian Versteeg. But we will be having the Rocinante design of the L5 space colony in virtual reality, and again, intended for full homesteading. So very much in construction. With our technology, internal technology for multi-user WebXR, we are also preparing the launch of Metaspace. That will be our own multi-user meeting technology and meeting solution for meeting in virtual reality in flat screen mode on any device, smartphone, tablet, laptop, or desktop PC, and immersively in VR headsets and in AR headsets. So a little preview of Metaspace that I will narrate. So this is a, remember the Selene city would have a big internal plaza. And so it would also have an observation tower, which would stick out of the top of Mount Malapert. And this is a draft design for this, for the observation deck on top of Mount Malapert. And we have our system already has screen sharing, such as the one that I'm using now, but then not via Zoom, but inside of our Metaspace system. We also have muting and other features. But with this technology, we are approaching another new business line, which is the event industry. And so we will provide to event organizers everything that they need for doing their delocalized and completely coronavirus-free live events, completely in virtual reality. And we have a TLD dedicated to that, which is Viventer. So with that, we will be doing expos and conferences in multi-user virtual reality with thousands, if need be, of synchronous avatars using WebXR immersively or in flat screen mode to attend a conference from the comfort of their office or their home. We can also do hybrid conferences, of course, which have some part in the physical world and the other part in virtual reality. And circling back to how this is relevant to the new space industry, well, we will be offering venues for the new space industry for their conferences on the moon. And so there will be dedicated, completely virtual reality, multi-user events and space exhibits and expos for the new space industry. We ourselves are planning to host one of these events ourselves. And so in 2021, we haven't decided on a date yet, we will launch the Lunar Space Expo, which will be a space industry event focused on the space industry, but inside of virtual reality on the moon, probably on top of Mount Malapert. And so these are some designs that we have for other industries, such as the energy industry, but you get the point. I would like to close on this slide because it really epitomizes the convergence of the space settlement movement with the movement to colonize or to settle and homestead cyberspace. So cyberspace and the colonization or the settlement, the space settlement movement have converged and are merging inside of projects like this one with Virtual Moon, later Virtual Mars, and the Rocinante space colony at the 5th Lagrange point or the 4th at L4 or L5. With that, I thank you warmly for your attention, and I hereby rest my case.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Unfortunately, we don't have time for many questions. Actually, we have only time for one, and I'll take this question. Well, I do like your project very, very much, and I look forward to walking in Selene and visiting with my Oculus Quest wrapped on all the beautiful things that you have done. And in fact, if you need anyone to test the environment, by all means, count on me. But at the same time, I'm afraid that I would feel very lonely in Selene, because the same thing could happen that happened with Second Life. That we had a beautiful, cool technology, because Second Life was very good technology 10 years ago. But at some point, everyone decided that it was too difficult, or it takes too long to learn. Second Life went out. Are things now with the next generation headsets and the new technologies reached a maturity in terms of user interface that will make people feel welcome immediately without having the impression that is something too difficult for them to learn?
Excellent question. Thank you for the question, Giulia. So our intention is to have virtual moon and then virtual Mars, etc., be as the next best thing to being there, which is, of course, the goal of VR. So yes, certainly in immersive mode, the user interface should feel very intuitive and natural. And as you may recall, my formative years before getting into VR were in 2D user interface and user experience design. So I think I have a good shot at making that interface extremely intuitive, natural feeling, etc., especially for the immersive mode. But remember that it will be accessible in flat screen mode, such as Second Life was, as well as in immersive mode. And so for the flat screen mode, we will create different user interfaces for different devices. So your user interface will be adapting to the device that you are using to access the virtual world. If you're accessing on a smartphone, you will have touch enabled. If you're accessing on a tablet, same thing. But if you're accessing on a laptop and desktop, it will be, you know, kind of a PC VR gaming experience, but on a flat screen mode. Importantly, in order to make people feel extremely welcome and to open the doors as wide as we can for virtual moon and virtual soul, because ultimately we will want to do the asteroid belt as well and the entire solar system in virtual reality, photorealistic virtual reality. So the basic version will be completely free, but that will be single user, so that relatively poor students in the far province of India or sub-Saharan Africa, they can access it without any cost as well. You only will start paying if you want to use it in multi-user mode, and then have expenses like user-generated content or user-generated, user-purchased plot of land on the moon or Mars where you can build your stuff like in Second Life. So it will be the threshold. The goal is educational, really, and raising public awareness and inviting people to use this virtual reality as a training ground for going to space for real later on. And so we think that the appeal will primarily be to people who are already in the space settlement movement. But with Elon Musk being so in the public eye with the Starship, and which did an interesting training test flight yesterday. So with all this media attention on Mars and also the return to the moon, we think that the community, the heart kernel of the space settlement movement will grow enormously. And we hope and think, and we will do whatever we can to make virtual reality in the form of this virtual moon space settlement experience. We hope that we will be instrumental in expanding and solidifying this space-bound and space-minded movement of regular people who want to go to space, who want to live in space, and who want to already experience it before they can actually go there themselves, which might be, you know, still a few decades out for most of us.
Thank you very much, Philippe. And maybe just quickly answer the last question from Chaitanya in the audience, who is not familiar with virtual reality, but would like to get into this amazing field, she says. And she asks how she should proceed to get familiar with VR. What is your advice?
my advice is to buy a Oculus Quest 2 virtual reality headset. It is the best virtual reality headset that you could ever in history buy for $299 US. And it is wireless. It has excellent graphics. So it is just a milestone of a device. It is very easy to use. It has plenty of free content. And we will be offering access to Virtual Moon on the Quest 2 as one of the first platforms to make it accessible immersively. So that is my advice. You will not regret buying your first VR headset, just $299 US, the Oculus Quest 2.
Thank you very much, Philippe. And now I'd like to ask the next speaker to get ready. The next speaker is Gabriel Rothblatt, who is best known as one of the first transhumanist politicians who was a candidate for US Congress in 2014, I believe. He was not elected, maybe because he ran as a Democrat in a Republican county. We are all hoping that one of these days he will announce that he wants to try again. Anyway, floor to you, Gabriel.
There we go. All right. Am I able to present?
Yes, you are.
I can't see you. Do you see now?
We see you well.
But not my slides.
No. If you want to show slides, you should push share screen. And then you have to choose which window you want to share. Here we go.
Yes, well, thank you. Thanks for organizing, Giulia, and everyone for being here, sharing this Day Transcendence with me, everyone else here. Yes, so we had so many themes. It's been going on for so long now, not nearly as long as Philippe's experience with VR. But we are at 15 colloquiums discussing the future of humanity and what we're becoming to be. And so the law of the cosmist, which is the next level in the diaspora of humanity.
Excuse me if I interrupt, Gabriel.
Brought here today.
Cannot hear you very well because there is an echo.
It is a fitting topic. I may.
Excuse me if I cannot hear you very well.
Hold. Let me help here. Thank you for.
I think maybe you should just wear a headphone. If it's an echo problem, just wear a headphone.
This sound better. Can you hear me better than the headphone? Excellent. Okay, and Giulia, to check our time, is David Brin still following me? I'm uncertain if you can still hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you well. We don't see you, but I think you have switched off the webcam to save bandwidth, which is good.
Excellent. Yes, and that should help the sound as well. Excellent. Okay, I will continue.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah, so I guess a little bit about me, Gabriel Rothblatt, yes, related to Martine Rothblatt, and very much like Philippe's story, my interest in this subject came at a very young age and had much to do with my my upbringing and the influences that that my parents provided for me. To be aware of these topics and to be interested and to follow them. For me, I have always, I think, gravitated towards a sociological perspective on the human condition, and particularly how that will lead us to space habitation. I have a bachelor's in political science from the University of Vermont, and I'm currently pursuing a master's in social innovation and sustainability from Goddard College. And it is through that that I really got introduced to this concept of decolonization and became fascinated at the parallels that it has for space settlement. There we go, advancing my slides here. So I really am looking at what is the underlying conditions that create our society, our legal structure, and what we can learn about what that would mean for cosmos society, for those living in space, cyberspace, outer space. Based on what we know about ourselves as animals, based on what we know about ourselves as the social creatures, and trying to get a sense of what lies ahead. In many ways, looking at what has come from the past. So to begin, I want to start with, what is decolonization? And to understand that, it takes, an understanding of the history of imperialism and colonization throughout time. And so I've included some basic definitions of imperialism. And I don't think that there are a few countries, nations that you could say were never colonized by another nation, but I don't think that there is any place on Earth that has not been touched by the problems of imperialism and the methods of imperialism, particularly colonization, and the tactics there of colonization, things that we know of racism, of patriarchy, many of these things that perpetuate themselves as and the social inequalities that have arisen from them. So of course the word decolonization, commonly used with an S instead of a Z, came in the early 20th century to start to describe countries of the countries that were seeking self-autonomy. Now, this I really want to use lightly, because the countries that decolonized in the S sense in the 1900s, 1800s, 1900s, these I would loosely call decolonizations, because there was so much land, so much culture, so much power that still remained in the hands of the colonizing country, even though the quote unquote reins of power were passed to the settlers more so than the indigenous population. So I think that is a big difference between what you can say is decolonization with an S, and then decolonization with a Z. Decolonization with a Z, meaning the actual repatriation of land, power, ways of being, knowing, doing, that still are illegal in many of these decolonized places, that still have not repatriated the indigenous population with their lands, their dignity. So I really wanted to try to apply this concept of decolonization to the sociological problem of space settlement. And there was, of course, a lot of interesting rabbit holes to go down. And I think one that is very important, and I want to kind of have the theme running through this, is that decolonization is not a metaphor in that sense. So decolonization is not something that should be used to replace all of the other social problems that we experience and that other groups experience. Particularly, for myself as an African American, the issues of slavery are in some ways incommensurable with the issues of decolonization. Both of them are important social justice issues, but in order for slaves to receive justice from the colonial state, there are some issues that are problemsome for the issues of justice for First Nation or Indigenous peoples. This is probably almost nowhere worse than it has been for Native Americans. But as I'll say, people of all races, types, countries, nationalities have been touched by the problems of decolonization, of colonization, and even the light form of decolonization, which you could say happens in the United States through a revolution, still has not happened in any way in terms of reparations for slavery, repatriation of indigenous lands, and many other structural problems that we have in society. So let me continue. So if decolonization is literally unsettling, how can it be relevant to cosmists? And that is, on its face of it, kind of, if we want to settle space, how is unsettling going to help that problem? And the reality is that actually colonization has been probably one of the largest obstacles to space settlement, even though it is in itself, to a degree, an imperative. There is still so much planet to fight over, that colonization, as I would believe, as Yalda said, in an imperial sense, will do nothing more than plant a flag on an object. It has no vested interest in individuals, which is, I think, it reminds me another way of in Yalda's talk, her perceived difference between San Francisco and Berlin as economic cultures. So these two differences in approaches, I think the colonizer approach is much more likely to plant a flag and to leave it there as long as no one plants a bigger flag, and to perpetuate, not just in outer space, but in cyberspace, the problems of superior hierarchical structures in social environments. And so whether we are talking about an indigenous alien race, we are talking about the captive mobile workers brought to some place to work the lands, or we are even talking about artificial or virtual intelligences. It is in the nature of imperial colonialism to subjugate. And that is a problem that Cosmos must confront, and must confront on the front end if they are to have their own laws and not simply be projections of Terran imperialism. So I want to say that I will be presenting means to see that the repatriation of indigenous lands is something that comes out of this, but I also have to say that there's a level that we should accept space settlement as a colonizer move to innocence, which is to say that all the settlers themselves, whether women, minorities, indigenous, are all victims of colonial imperialism. And we all have our own, rights and justice that we are seeking. We may never see a true repatriation of any indigenous lands farther than what we have seen. And we can, although, move forward as looking at space settlement as the least harmful way to move forward without addressing the harms and wrongs of the past. So as I move into looking quickly at some sociobiological background and then into some socioeconomic issues, my premise is that decolonization is a precondition for Cosmos law, that until we deal with decolonization on Earth, that we cannot attain to a state of Cosmos society and Cosmos law. So sociobiology is the scientific study of biology, especially ecological and evolutionary aspects of social behavior in animals and humans. And it is these ecological and evolutionary aspects particularly that I focused on, because for me, I do have a religious belief in the habitation, the migration of space. I believe that it is likely written somewhere in the code of life to reach for space, and that any form of life, whether it be avian, whether it be reptilian, whether it be Arbolian, what have you, that all forms of life are in essence images. They are archetypes of successful interplanetary species in earlier circles of our timeline. So on the right hand here, you have what is called the social ecological model. We all probably have seen it in many different forms. And it is, Yep, thank you. It is particularly useful for us here to reflect on two questions. One is how the expression of our genes changes throughout new environments. And then two, how will the adaptation of technology allow us to assume some control and commands over this. So one thing that the socio-ecological model does not include, at least not directly, is ironically any mention of ecology. So it doesn't really talk to how nature itself informs the expression of our genetic code, including behavior, which is the foundation of what will then lead to the outer circle of the public policy, state, local laws and regulations, which is in essence what we're trying to get to discuss the law of the cosmos. Is how are all these smaller circles, how do they feed into that larger circle, which is the fabric of interplanetary law. So we have our individual and then our kind of our macro expression, the expression of society as a whole versus the expression of ourselves, maybe ontogenetic versus phylogenetic expression. So the socioeconomic paradigm, which is really what I hope to present here, has 5 areas that I think really are the pillars of the problem of decolonization that must be confronted before cosmos society can exist in and of itself. And there are no particular order. Actually, I just, of priority. But these are I think the 5 overarching, areas of concern that are rather universal in terms of application. However, certainly some apply greater to some national cases than they do others. First and foremost is the devastation of the natural environment. Colonization has, by its nature, biological, ecological, or imperial, leads to homogeneity. It threatens ecological biodiversity in just about every sense of the term that you can use. We have particularly seen this in the imperial sense through the development of a highly individualistic philosophy of possession, use, and ownership. That means that if you're in possession of something, you can just completely destroy it, and that was your right to do. It removes the right of any other co-user, future user, or past user. And that is, has not been a sustainable concept. And we are, as a Terran society, not even yet a cosmos society, dealing with the realities that the devastation of the natural environment has had. So through concepts like Charles Eisenstein's sacred economics, the accounting for true cost of mining and manufacturing makes the business case for space even better. I am not someone who thinks that the business case for space is bad as it is now. I certainly have grave concerns, and the devastation of the natural environment is one where the military-industrial complex's role in the economics of space adds to the threat of loss of the ecological biodiversity, even of the shared use of water and air. But when we account for the true cost, and in this case, what we're really talking about is the cost of pollution. So currently, right now, pollution is essentially not accounted for. That's why we are having conversations around carbon taxes and things like this, because the tens of thousands of years of maintenance of nuclear and coal ash waste is essentially just something we're passing on, assuming was going to go away or will be mitigated by future generations, and there's actually no assurance of that. If we were to account for cleaning up mines, strip mines, of nuclear, of decommissioning of nuclear power plants, it would be so cost prohibitive that we would actually be looking to space. That the economic argument for going to space becomes so much greater because we are accounting for the loss of the natural environment. We are accounting for the ownership of future generations to to these mining and manufacturing processes in particular. And so, I think the realization here, and I think we're just starting to come to this, because as Eisenstein and many others have described, we are coming up to a point where the bill is due, right? We are starting to pay those costs now. And so when you look at removal of nuclear power plants, the problems with Fukushima, the cost of these things are astronomical, pun intended. And so when we are looking for funding for things such as the space elevator versus rockets, which could possibly explode and send irradiated, waste all over, the planet, there is an increasing economic argument for space habitation, space manufacturing, simply based on the devastation of the natural environment. Excuse me. And some of these things are going to loop into each other, so I'm going to keep on going. But I believe that particularly here, this is important for cosmists themselves, because if cosmists do not take these positions in the foundations of their legal systems, then they are opening the door to allowing some of the demons of our archetypal nature to create themselves as the next frontier of imperialists. And so a cosmist society, in my opinion, must have these values at its core. So it is not dismantling living worlds as we are doing right now, which are themselves arguably conscious living beings. Oops, wrong way. All right, so the next issue is the indentured servitude of women. This is something that you could say began prior to imperialism and has some basis in our sociobiology due to the nature of our sexual beings and our sexual reproduction. So the nature of while the nature of our dichotomy, introduces conflict, the evolution of our biology has presented, means to counterbalance that. But where we are probably most at risk structurally is the lack of accounting of women's work in what was called the United Nations System of National Accounts, which was a wartime tool, and how it is leading to the asocial reproduction of what is called the nuclear family, which itself is a tool to further the ownership of a head of household, which is typically the male. This social structure came about during colonialization, and itself is completely unsustainable economically if you were to account for the work that women do as paid and particularly equally paid. Many women are now able to work, but they still do not see, you know, an accounting for the vast majority of what they're expected to do. And so when we realize this section of our decolonialization, we're looking at a very different, you know, social structuring at the base level. And that is something else that, as cosmic society has been envisioned, we do see very different ideas of line and marriages, of kind of group chosen type families versus families which are, you know, just directly, you know, patrilineal. Excellent. And so then there are the issue of reparations for slavery. You know, decolonization does not absolve responsibility for reparations. They are somewhat incommensurable. The U.S. government, for example, did promise 40 acres of Indian land as reparations for plantation slavery. I would posit that, you know, not being able to give something that doesn't belong to you, 40 acres and a mobile utility engine on a new world is a possible, you know, alternative to that. Space offers a resolution to the incommensurability of the captive versus native justice in colonial systems. And the repatriation of indigenous lands. First and foremost, I think this provides a very interesting impetus for mass migration of who would go, when, where, why, and how. It also creates a new playing field in the international interplanetary exchanges when you aren't just playing with yourselves and your own colonies to make new rules. The final area is Social Security. Colonial accounting not only has made women invisible, but it has placed a greater value on the elderly than the young. And it's different from nation to nation, but Social Security, the care for the elder, is a rather universal problem that we are confronting in the modern world. It is also interesting to note that the older you get, the less susceptible you are to radiation and the higher benefits you get from microgravity. So I think that there's a great case here for Social Security to become a lottery for space habitation. And the same numbers that we get are one, identifiers, and two, kind of act like your selective service when the opportunity for your age, skill, or displacement status is called upon and prioritized for availability. I know we're a little bit over, so I'm going to yield the rest of the time for Mr. Brin, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Perhaps we have time for one question before giving the floor to the last speaker. I'm so deep in thinking about what Gabriel said that I don't have a question at this moment. Does anyone have a question for Gabriel? Doesn't seem to be the case. In which case,
I can offer a question. Maybe Gabriel could comment on maritime law and seasteading, which I know he knows something about, but I feel like, you know, we're going to have to rely heavily on international law, maritime law, the law of the sea as we go into space. I just didn't know if he had anything to add on that.
Yeah, that is a great question, and I think it is some of our best, you know, grounds to look at for how we move forward here. Unfortunately, you know, maritime law does not offer a lot of great precedents for that. Probably the best thing it does is for conflict resolution on the high seas. Their system of resolving conflicts through a special court, it would be. I think that what we could learn most would probably be trying to mimic some of these arguments through the maritime court system. There is a lot of opportunity that we do to test these out with maritime law. But however, unfortunately, I think maritime law has offered itself to, the colonial powers more so than it has any, answer for social justice. Sadly, I think probably the situation around cruise ships and the tens of thousands of people held captive because of their status as minor citizens and not imperial citizens demonstrates exactly the need to decolonize before we habitate.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. I'd like now to give the floor to the last speaker, who is one of my, and I'm sure one of yours, favorite science fiction writer. Over to you, David Brin.
Hello, Ken. First off, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll hurry on ahead. A very interesting talk by Gabriel, reflecting the cultural value of a maturing civilization, which actually questions the behaviors of its revered ancestors and even its present day leaders, and even its present day values. The interesting thing is, of course, that almost never happened throughout history. We're the first in all of history to systematically teach large fractions of its young people that their greatest civic duty is to interrogate their own tribal elders. And I think that this Gabriel's talk really reflected that that value system, which is the only thing that can save us after 6,000 years of brutal patriarchies on all continents by all peoples. I am going to do a share screen now. I'm hoping I'll do it correctly. And I have an awful lot to cover because I have a slideshow that was modified, a slideshow that was meant for an hour. And I believe I just have half an hour, is that right? Hello?
In theory, you have 20 minutes, but in practice, you take all the time you want, and we will be happy to listen to you.
I'm the last guy. Okay, let's go.
That's it.
All right. All right, let's talk about cosmic aspects of the near future. I'm hired by all sorts of ranges of people, from activist organizations to government agencies, to talk about the future. So, wow, it's here. Okay, so why did I do this? Why did I change the date to 02020? Well, I'll let you guess about that until the end. Okay, here's some of my credentials. I've been writing about the future for a very long time, and The Postman was made into a movie. And many of those books up along the top are being revised, given new introductions, and being reissued as we speak across the next 3 months. So it's quite a time. Talking dolphins in space, how's that? Okay, we have many problems. Although the ratio, the percentage of the world's children who are starving and have no education available is the lowest it's ever been in the history of our species. And the ratio of those who come home to refrigerators and at least basic sanitation is the highest that it's ever been. The remaining amounts is absolutely horrific and should tear at our conscience. And we are able to think two thoughts at the same time. We are able to recognize fantastic progress and recognize that we should absolutely feel a gut-wrenching guilt over what progress has been neglected and how it could have been so much more. All right, I made this slide long before our current problems, but boy, do we have problems in regarding that slide. And if wealth disparities continue on the path they're heading toward, we're without the slightest doubt headed for revolution. Only the complaining people will have on their side all the folks who understand nano, bio, and nuclear. It's just stupid not to buy off this revolution with reform. And then there's how the universe could get at us. Now, here's a slide that I've been giving a lot, different agencies, futurists, and all of that. And it's basically about how civilizations have failed in the past. And as Toynbee points out, and as more recently Jared Diamond pointed out, there were methods by which civilizations assured their own calamities in the past, and there are new ones. Along the left-hand side, you see natural calamities that can strike, ecological suicide, which Gabriel spoke about, and is a major focus of Jared Diamond, and of course, my own novel, Earth, back in 1990, and the works of Kim Stanley Robinson. Enemies in war, many civilizations were brought down that way, and there are those who believe that we are currently under attack by those who do not want the kind of civilization that questions itself the way I described earlier. Societal meltdown, that one should irk and hurt because we're experiencing it, and the feudal attractor state, where most continents, for most of the last 6,000 years, brutal males imposed not just patriarchy, but a fierce class protective system, and then being outcompeted by others. All of these are things that should cause us twinges right now. But on the right, you have some that are being discussed by groups in Oxford and Cambridge who came up with those books there about new ways that we might destroy ourselves or destroy our hopes. And that may be classic ways that are responsible for the Fermi paradox, why we don't see signs of aliens out there. I believe, for instance, the feudal attractor state is so powerful Darwinistically that it may indeed have its effects. So there's the Anthropocene, which is ecological, deadly innovations, bio, nano, cyber, sci-fi, and the danger of renunciation, that there are forces in society that believe that the way that we can mitigate the problems of advancing into the future rapidly is by renouncing the future. And there are very strong forces on the right that are pushing for this, and there are forces on the left that also go for romanticism that says that we must pull back. And then there's rigid overdependence on fragile systems. If anybody's interested in that, they should write to me separately, and I'll provide the breakdown of overly fragile systems that we have that I did for a recent publication. Now, there are two concepts that are bookends to all of this. One is the singularity, and that is that something may happen where we have a technological breakthrough that simply throws out all calculations. Say, for instance, all peoples around the world get access to either cyber enhancement of their brain capabilities, or perhaps something that's just coming up lately and came up in my novel Existence, and Temple Grandin gave me a blurb for that, is the notion that average people may get access to savant capabilities, which would enable them to, in many ways, keep up with the machines and even exceed the machines. All of these are possibilities discussed in science fiction, but only a few of them are really starting to clarify before us. The other bookend is the concept I mentioned earlier, and that's the Fermi paradox. And that is, are any of these things so common and so compulsory that they help to explain why we don't see signs of predecessors across the cosmos? Not only these Brits in Oxford and Cambridge believe that it indicates that we have no chance. But I believe what it indicates is that we may be the ones who are called upon to go out into the galaxy and save others, because I think we can skirt past a lot of these things, but just barely because of some quirky traits that we have. All right, so in my novel Existence, and you can, I'm sure that somebody in the organizer will share some links. I'll provide a link to the 3-minute video trailer for Existence. Best 3 minutes you'll have with your clothes on. And we're all cousins. That's the most important thing that we have to recognize. And our great-great-grandchildren will be of all races. And so it's simply stupid Darwinistically not to include everybody. All right, so yeah, these are images. Now, the dream of heading out there. Well, one of the things about colonization is there's nobody out there that we know of. So if we were to get access to space resources, which we'll talk about, then there's the possibility that nobody's being exploited. Now, in the very popular and excellent TV series, The Expanse, they manufacture an underclass because that provides you with with drama. But the situation in the TV show Expanse is impossible, because human females cannot spill into the world enough babies to overpopulate the riches that they are accumulating from those asteroidal resources. It's just not possible, physically possible for human women to create that many people, to keep up with the rate at which wealth is being created in that universe. So being able to create wealth out there is one of the top reasons that we could then be able to stop tearing into our mother planet and have more than enough to continue what we have been doing the last 70 years. And that is giving a lot more useful stuff to people of all races. All right, now we've fallen into a zero-sum fight over the immediate goal, the moon versus asteroids. So what are the comparisons? Let's start with resources. We do know that the lunar poles have water. I'm an advisor with NASA's Innovative and Advanced Concepts program called NIAC. And we have given grants to groups that are trying to develop water from either asteroids or the lunar poles. And my thesis advisor at UCSD for my PhD actually predicted water at the lunar poles. And that's a great thing. But if we can get it from elsewhere, it's much better, because A, you wouldn't have to haul it out of a gravity well, but B, there may be just enough water on the moon for future lunar cities. And talk about a colonization problem if we use up what they would need to live before they even live. That's not a very good idea. Okay, so where are ores? I'm going to take I'm sure that these slides will be shared with you, but it's important to recognize that most of the metal in the Earth sank into the Earth's core before the moon was formed by a colliding Mars-sized planet. So starting metal poor from the Earth's crust, the molten moon's remaining metals then sank into its own core. So the only metals at the surface are those bound into tight oxides, aluminum oxides, silicon oxides, titanium oxides, which are very hard to split and refine, need prodigious energy. On Earth, elements got separated into ores by water processes that are absolutely missing on the moon. So there's some scattered meteoritic iron if you want to drag magnets, and a little ice at the poles. At pole sites that have zero sunlight, by the way. Helium-3 is an absolute myth. Sure, maybe in 100 years, maybe, but there are no customers. There's nobody buying helium-3. And all the lunar resources you hear about are in parts per billion. So many asteroids, on the other hand, come from either water-rich comets, so they're almost 50% water or more, or else a shattered protoplanet, which includes pure refined metal from that planet's core. So there is, and what this slide, I don't have time to go into it, what it shows is that the lunar surface is not a way station to anywhere. It is not energetically a way station. Time is another matter. The lunar surface is much more accessible by time. So it's a better place for astronauts. But as far as energy is concerned, it's easier to get to the near-Earth crossing asteroids. Okay, so let's compare it. The moon is much closer by time, 2 to 5 seconds for operation, just days for human arrival. But each person day costs huge amounts of money. Asteroids, trip times, and zero-G are problematic for humans, but fine for robots. So robotics is the crucial tech. If we can develop robots that can melt or mine or refine asteroids, this is simply a no-brainer. There is nothing on the moon that is economically of interest. I go through a bunch of other things like whether or not it's a good place for practicing landings, whether or not the dust on the moon is poisonous. But as Andy Weir, the author of The Martian, said when he wrote Artemis, his moon colonization novel, the only purpose of a lunar colony in the near term is tourism. So is there a sweet spot? The moon can be useful for testing our landing procedures for Mars. We should experiment on robot returned asteroidal matter. And we need to recognize that I am not saying that humans won't go back to the moon. Humans will go back to the moon. There's no reason for America or Japan or Europe to go to the moon. There are wannabes who need their validation, their Apollo validation. They desperately need it, and they will go. There will be human footprints on the moon within the next 10 years. Easily, they will be Chinese, some Russians, billionaires, Indians, all going to the lunar surface to say, today I am a man. They're going there for their bar mitzvahs. And I think the ideal situation for the United States would be to keep their hand in with robots on the moon and continue exploring robotically, because after all, I could be wrong. They might find something, magnetic monolith, I don't know. But also to sell hotel and landing services to the tourists. Also a lunar orbit station would be useful as a garage for national security assets, which would help keep the peace. So there's Andy Weir's, the crux is the moon's principal attraction in the near future is tourism and symbolism, a national rite of passage that US achieved 50 years ago. Humanity is going back to the lunar surface for that reason. US can sell hotel, lander services. I expect that Bezos, et cetera, will, even if NASA doesn't, while monitoring what others find there. Meanwhile, Japan just returns asteroid samples. We have asteroid samples returning. These are things that only we can do. So why should we not do the things that only we can do instead of copying things that we did 50 years ago? That's my pitch. All right, now here's another aspect, and that is we need to keep our eyes open for interesting possibilities that I talk about in my novel Existence, and that were talked about even earlier by others, and that is the notion of whether or not the Fermi paradox has another solution, and that is they're already here. And I portray this in Existence, and some of the best places to look for possible lurkers, these would be von Neumann's self-replicating probes that entered the solar system, perhaps even 1 million or 2 or 10 million years ago. One possible place is we've been discovering co-orbitals. These are sort of semi-moons of the Earth-Moon system that approach at various intervals, regular intervals, and then drift away again. It's the perfect place to sample the Earth and take a look and see if anything's been going on there here of interest, and yet stay mostly out of reach. And there are some plans now to ping these co-orbitals and see if there's something there. Very interesting. And here's a couple of them. So we may, and there's the shape of these weird orbits that they follow. And I talk about it in existence. And there's the, there's the link for the, for that trailer for the book. Okay, so let's get back down to Earth. In existence, there's a news reporter. Everybody in the year 2045 has got augmented reality. I had to explain augmented reality as recently as 4 or 5 years ago. Now, I don't have to explain what's going on the inside of her shades, but those tendrils, those antennae, are the natural extensions that would let a short person be tall, look around, see what's going on around them. They might detach and serve as drones to see what's in that dark alley ahead. These are great. These might be the notion that augmented reality would be the great equalizer. And I talk about this in my nonfiction book, The Transparent Society, as well as my novel Earth, and of course in existence. Now, I'm going to dive into something that I give in some of my other presentations, but I'm going to get it very quickly here. The web has become excruciatingly harmful as well as beneficial. This is not new. This has been going on every time we developed new methods to create stores of knowledge outside our head. And the printing press enabled millions of people to have memories outside their heads, have knowledge outside their heads. And glass lenses became a necessity when people trying to read realized they had poor vision. And so that propelled telescopes and microscopes. And so what you have is the augmentation, the prosthetic augmentation of memory, vision, and perspective augmented attention. And always when these revolutions come, pessimists say that human beings can't deal with this vast expansion of what they can know, see, and pay attention to. It's going to have to be gatekeepered by an elite. And this will lead to crises. And always optimists said, this is going to expand what it is to be human. Humans will know more. They'll gain more compassion for others not like them because they'll be able to read about the life experiences of others not like them. So always in each of these crises of increased memory, vision, and attention, there were always crises that were triggered. The pessimists were always right in the short term. The printing press's principal output for its first 50 years were horrible tracts of hate that exacerbated Europe's religious wars. But eventually books did spread, and people started the long process that Gabriel is an illustration of expanding the ability of people to conceive that the others, or I have a book called Otherness, that otherness is a positive thing, and therefore compassion for others is something that we should develop. I could go into this in more detail, but the main thing is, and the arrival of a new form of communication, radios and loudspeakers, amplified orators to godlike power in the 1930s and almost killed us all. But 1950s television actually was an exception. Its benefits outweighed its disadvantages tremendously. And Gandhi and Martin Luther King credited TV cameras with saving their lives. Okay, so right now we're heading into this era of the knowledge mesh. and supervision and super immersion. And the crisis that's resulted is a breakdown in coherence and confidence. And we need to find solutions to this. And I've been proposing some, others propose some. If what's going on in the United States of America right now is enemies are using some of our own inventions and some of this expanded ability to know and to see and to pay attention, and using it to undermine the very things that have made us strong. For example, the character trait that Gabriel illustrated so beautifully of societal self-criticism, which was almost completely absent in every culture of the past on every continent, and is a source of fantastic strength and nobility for this rising world culture that he and many others are trying to build. That aspect of self-criticism is now being used against us in ways that are like a metastasized cells spreading disinformation and mutual distrust. So it's a strength that is being warped by enemies against us. All right, so next in my talks, I talk about AI and human augmentation, tech addiction. I won't go into any of that. The increasing diversity of those we call human will spread beyond races and genders. It can include those animal species that we might, and I think we already have begun uplifting, as in my uplift novels. Certainly robotics, certainly in the search for aliens, in the talents that we develop within our own minds, and in augmentation of our children, which for well or ill is going to happen. So we better start thinking about the pros and cons now. I have slides that talk about the various ways in which human augmentation can take place. The number one is simply remedial interventions. It's been proved without a doubt that if you simply supply all children with nutrition, health, and education, the average IQ of their generation goes up 15, as much as 20 points. So if you want human augmentation, the number one thing you do is you take care of the remedial stuff, and you'll get a lot more creative people and a lot more calm people. I was involved in the 1970s in the elimination of lead from gasoline. 20 years later, crime rates plummeted all across the United States. So we need to do more of that sort of thing. But there are other ways in which augmentation is going to proceed, such as games that teach. These are getting a boon in the remote learning. And maybe one of the best things to come out of this isolation pandemic. Pharmacological changes I've discussed, prosthetic, cyber neural links, biological computing. No time to get into any of these because we need to get back to space. And of course, as I said, robotics are going to be a huge, whether they're scary, sexy, depressing, or simply replace us, it's going to be a major part of our future. And the question is, will we meet others? Well, I think we will. I think it's going to be within the next 5 years. Whether or not they are truly others or artificially generated ones that are meant to screw us up, like these monoliths that have been placed out there as art projects. What the monoliths show is that there are guys out there who will do anything as soon as they can for the old reason that immature males have always done unwise things, and that is the magical incantation of justification, because we can. And there will be people who will spread mythologies, AI, automatic response systems. I portray this in existence. Whether they're true or not, most likely not, we will experience contact pretty soon. Okay, so the dream of space has not died. There's material enough out there in the asteroids for 3,000 surface area Earths if we go back to the dream of the 1980s of O'Neill colonies and things like that. And with every ethnicity being able to have its own special place if it chooses to not mix, so that you have thousands and thousands of diversity experiments, increasing our diversity and our cultural breadth. But in order to do that, we have to push ahead, not renounce. So all of which prompts the question, are we actually simplistically moving in a direction? Now that's called teleology, and it's highly suspect. But nevertheless, if it enables us to do what Gabriel was talking about, and that is at long last question the rapacious empires that almost all of our civilizations partook in, and to question them and to question all of the assumptions that led to failures of otherness, and find our mistakes. And if we can get past the latest crises of communication, so that we get back to negotiation instead of demonizing each other, then there's a real chance that we can move ahead. And we have to remember that what we are seeing around us, even in America, this highly advanced civilization appeals to either pasts that were real or pasts that were fictitious. And this is a scene from that trailer for Existence, in which, there's the calls to reject forward progress are things that we are going to see more and more, appealing to people's particular symbolic paths to trying to achieve the same thing, a renunciation. I want to do a little plug here for a little project I've been engaged in, and that's called TASAT. It's an attempt to create an online discussion and database so that anytime there is a crisis in the future, anybody who's trying to deal with a crisis can come and query, has there ever been any science fiction about this sort of thing? Let's say mole people come out of the ground or triphid plants start walking around trying to talk to us. TASAT would be able to instantly say, there have been science fiction stories that worked out scenarios about this. So it's TASAT, TASAT.ucsd.edu. And we're still in early days, and we need help, either financial or volunteer programming to help bring this to fruition. And who knows, there may come a day when a particular scenario happens and a particular science fiction story from the 1950s saves us all. Hey, it could happen. Okay, so do we have a chance? Well, those guys in Oxford and Cambridge don't think so. They think that list from my first early slide is too daunting, and it helps explain why no one is out there, and we won't be out there either. On the other hand, I have reason to believe that we are special, that we're unusual. The fact that we can do experiments that divert from the classic patriarchal feudalism motif that dominated almost every agricultural society all over the world. We can because the experiments have been pulled. Periclean Athens, Da Vinci's Florence. There were two experiments in India, ancient India, and Amsterdam, and our 240-year experiment in reciprocal accountability and flattened power systems. That may be rare. And if it is, and especially the possibility that we might be able to voluntarily switch from male dominated societies, which are understandable during periods of great fear, which almost all of our ancestors lived in. to a far more relaxed and reasonable female-centered system of governance, led by Jacinda Ardern, I hope. If I could press a button. Not through calamity, not through anger, but through the simple recognition that when our fear levels go down, we are able to reduce the testosterone levels and move over to a system that is based more upon mediation and negotiation. Then perhaps in that case, the galaxy may actually get somebody traveling through it who would find the others and help to rescue them. What a possible way to regain some optimism here at the end of this ghastly year. So our years speak to us. 2020 was harsh. I am old enough to tell you that any of you snowflakes who feel ruined and wrecked by 2020 would not have lasted 2 weeks in 1968. 1968 was worse in almost every conceivable way, and any 2 weeks would have killed you. But that's an old fart, talking about how our bad years were much badder in our day. The point is, 1968 ended with something spectacularly wonderful. Like Pandora's box, we had opened and it seemed like we'd spilled every horrible thing into the world. And the nation was about to fall apart. But the very last news item, you look up what the very last news item was in 1968. And it was a symbolic diadem of hope at the bottom of Pandora's box, the very last news item of 1968. And maybe we'll have that excuse for hope this year. In any event, 2021 might be an improvement. Gosh, we're hoping so. It certainly looks like it might be. But even better, add a 0 in front. This is an innovation of the Long Now Foundation, and I think we should all spread it. If you add a 0 in front of your date, you are making a gestural statement of confidence in our descendants that we'll have any, that we will give them something that they can stand on and keep adding years for at least another, 9,000 years? So in any event, and with that, I will open things up for questions if we aren't desperate to move along. I'm sorry I went so rapidly through some of these points, and I'm sure that some of them will be available for links. Is anybody still there?
Yes, we are. Thank you very much, David. And I definitely look forward to putting a 0 in front of this year and the next one. I see that a lot of people...
May you personally add zeros in front of your years for the next 80 years.
Thank you so much. May you too. I see that a lot of people in the chat are saying that you gave a great talk. Questions like, how can we make peace with forces far superior to us, Lovecraftian gods? And this comes from a person who is looking forward to buy your book, Existence. And may I recommend also all other books by David. They are great. Lori says, okay, just wishing that 2021 will be better than 2020. I think we all wish that. Okay, who has a question for David?
Happy to talk about any of that stuff. I think that it's important that we be able to, while we are criticizing our own culture, to be able to recognize that the encouragement we've received from Hollywood to criticize our own culture is embedded in almost all the Hollywood films and much of the music and most of the novels that we've read. We were brought up with this meme. It's being used against us now. but it is a fundamental strength. And I think that it's important that we recognize and acknowledge that to some degree now and then. Did that give someone time to I'm looking at the chat. Any other questions?
No, I think
how can we make peace with forces far superior to ourselves? Lovecraftian gods? Well, I am not actually a science fiction author, or I am a front for several aliens and AIs who write novels and sell them through me. I will tell them, shut the hell up. They think I'm joking, okay? They talk to me through these fillings. That's why they're really desperately afraid. That's why I get the longevity treatments, because most of the young people don't have the fillings that enable them to talk to me, but they used to use pain. Stop that. They think I'm joking. Idiots. Just because they have IQs of 9,000.
I'm very interested in your point that it makes more sense for the United States to do things like mining the asteroids rather than going back to the moon. I kind of disagree. I'd like to see people go back to the moon, but I can understand your arguments, and I'm not from the US anyway. So I consider myself as part of that rest of the world that will eventually, finally, perhaps soon, go back to the moon. But I'm just wondering whether you have read the science fiction book Red Moon, I believe, by King Stanley Robinson, and how likely you think the scenario of a Chinese-dominated moon would be. And if so, whether it's a scenario that the United States should be willing to live with.
Well, I think that, Stan Robinson is a magnificent guy. He's my bro, and he's one of the greatest of the greats. He has become rather gloomy, but I think he points to good things. I think it's terribly important that China not be allowed to dominate this century. But I don't think that an American presence on the moon is vital to that. I think American domination with partners. I think domination is a bad word. How about colonialization? Oops. Of asteroids, I think is terribly important. Look, humanity, we are going back to the moon. There's no question of that. It's going to happen. The Chinese are going to go to the moon. The Russians will certainly try to set something up so that we give them all the technology to go to the moon, because they can't do it themselves. The Indians will want to go to the moon. Everybody wants their bar mitzvahs. And I'm not talking about robotics, by the way. We should continue to send robots to the moon. I think we should continue to send orbitals to the moon. And I think that it would be a great thing if we sold landers or rented landers. When we get the Lunar Gateway orbiter above the moon, we should have hotel spaces, make money off it, and say, welcome to our moon. But there is nothing to be gained from American footprints on that dusty, poison plain in the foreseeable future. And it's going to be extremely costly. And what would happen is, because of the cost, we would suddenly announce, oh boy, it's an international expedition, and we're all going to share technology, which means all of our technology will go to the Chinese for their landing. This is a lose, lose, lose proposition. The United States and the United States and Japan have already hinted at what would be the best thing to do. And that is go to where the riches are. Humanity's going to go to the moon, fine. I don't think that it puts China, even if China took over the whole moon, I don't think it would put them in any position to dominate the next century if we were doing the other thing. It's whether or not we're vigorous. It's whether or not we're doing things that no one else can do in partnership with the Japanese and Europeans, sure.
Does
There's
anyone
nothing
else
there.
have questions for David?
Huh? Yeah, go ahead.
Javin.
What do you think we should do with Space Force? Can you read me?
Yeah, Space Force, Space Force. It's a done deal. It's done. It's done. I think that it should be used in negotiation to let Republicans have their symbolism. They're symbolism obsessed. Look at how they required specifically patterns of naming naval ships in such a way that no Democrat would ever again get an aircraft carrier. It's absolutely amazing. Look up David Brin aircraft carriers and see how incredibly symbol obsessed Republicans are. And as far as I'm concerned, let them have their Space Force. What I am angry about is the diversion of skilled professional officers from useful endeavors to designing spandex uniforms, and then getting liposuction in order to fit them. I think that if it can be done graciously and slowly, and fob off the most useless officers into designing uniforms, then okay. I don't care. But the whole notion of whether or not it becomes at some point strategically beneficial to some hostile power to let out EMPs and destroy our space advantages, this is something that I think is terribly, terribly worrisome. And that's one of the reasons I think we should build the Lunar Gateway station, because strategic assets can be garaged there safe from harm. But you see, I'm not opposed to strategic thinking. I think that it's terribly important that the United States of America be able to maintain the best time that humanity's ever had, which is the American Pax of the last 80 years. And I think I just made Gabriel's head explode. But there is simply, statistically speaking, absolutely no answer to the fundamental fact that the American Pax for the last 80 years has been the best time for humanity, including morally, in the development of systems that Gabriel represents for self-criticism. Anybody else? Because I can expand on that. The fact is that it's very hard under standard left-right or standard political dogmas to classify the statements that I've just made. You can see where they don't fit. Because I approve of the general trend, moral trend of the left, and I disapprove of the tendency of it to be sanctimoniously blind to how much progress. David said he would tell us at the end. Oh yeah, well I did. Yeah, all right. So any other questions? I have a new beehive I have to inspect. I just installed it last night. So if any of you come to visit, first off is keep your darn distance, but I'll provide you with some honey.
I definitely look forward to come and taste your honey.
All right.
I think.
Will you be letting people have? You know what? I'll insert into the chat a few links that people can find. Here is the trailer for Existence. Whoops! It's going to.
I gave that link already in the chat.
You did already? All right. Yeah. So. All right, so in any event, I wish you all much success, and here's to a civilization that is finally worthy of that word.
Thank you very much, David. As usual, this was a great talk and a lot of food for thought. I would also like to thank everyone for attending this event, and also to invite you at the next Terasem event, which as usual should take place on July 2021, on July 20, the anniversary of Apollo 11 landing on the moon. Again, thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time.